Okay, I want to welcome everyone that is here. Um, again, welcome you. I'm Debbie Silverstein. I'm the State Director of SPAN Ohio, and we're really pleased to have Michael Lighty with us today. Before we get started with that, I have a couple of announcements to make. First of all, I want to invite all of you that are here today to become members of SPAN Ohio. We do have a paid membership to help support the organization, and you can do that from our website. And Matt has just posted the link for our website, and you can find that where it says membership there, and join us and become a member of SPAN Ohio. The other thing is, if you're in the Cleveland area, on Sunday, November 15th, we will have a masked, socially distanced demonstration for Medicare for All, and that's going to be in Lakewood at 49,000 Detroit Avenue. It's the Bernice Pike Park at 1 p.m. And Mike Skindle, who is the sponsor of our bill in the Ohio House, is going to be the main speaker there. And I'm going to introduce Michael Lighty, who is an expert on Medicare for All. He was with California Nurses Association for years, forever, and then National Nurses United, and then you're at the Sanders Institute now, correct?
That's right, I'm at the Sanders Institute.
And that, so anyways, he has done a lot of work, and he's an excellent strategist, and he has some really unique insights into the election and the political landscape. And so we are here to get those unique insights and to see if maybe, from what he tells us, that we can determine and construct a viable strategy to move these bills forward, either at the state level here in Ohio or nationally, and work on those. So, Michael, I'm going to turn it over to you and go for it.
All right. Thank you, Debbie. It's great to see all my friends in SPAN. It's great to talk with Ohio on this early Saturday morning. So thank you very much for having me. I think it wasn't about 10 days ago we thought Ohio was in play, on the cusp, battleground state. And I imagine that many of you were kind of surprised to find ourselves in a situation where Ohio might be competitive at the presidential level. Because the truth is, the upper Midwest states and Ohio, clearly in some respects in the lead, has seen a shift from a swing state to kind of obviously a state where Republicans are very strong. I believe that's indicative of where the country is. And I believe that at root cause of that is a fundamental failure of the Democrats to present a program that is going to actually substantially improve the material conditions, the economic well-being of workers. And other issues come to the fore, obviously, in communities of color and other constituencies for women and so forth. But in particular, white working class men do not see the Democratic Party as offering a program for them. That doesn't mean that the right or the so-called moderates in the Democratic Party are correct, that somehow we have to downplay Black Lives Matter. And they're particularly wrong when it says we have to downplay things like Medicare for All and Green New Deal. I mean, look at the election results. Florida is a very tough state, apparently, for Democrats to win, particularly when Trump somehow represents, I'm afraid, a tendency that's pretty prevalent among Floridians. Yet they passed a $15 minimum wage. That is exactly the kind of thing that's going on in the electorate when red state voters pass Medicaid expansion. When you hear voters in Michigan and other upper Midwestern states say, yeah, I'll end up voting for Biden because I don't like Trump, but Biden's healthcare plan doesn't do anything for me. And the irony is, of course, is that the ACA is only popular to the extent that it is an alternative to having nothing. literally nothing. And so it's a much more complicated issue environment, I think, than is often let on. And it always amazes me whenever centrists lose or don't do well, it's the left's fault. And whenever the centrists win, it's their doing, right? So after 2018, we had a situation where, we got all these Democrats in the House who've won swing districts. So we better hew to the middle. And even though, of course, this was a time when the squad was emerging, when there was, obviously huge foment at the base of the party on the progressive side. Oh, no, we have to. And now that the House, it looks like Democrats have lost 6 seats. Maybe they're going to lose a couple more, particularly here in California. Things are a little rough. And we literally, on the eve of the election, were told that Nancy Pelosi is unassailable, and now she may have a leadership fight. And somehow, according to Abigail Spenberger from Virginia, that it's all those people talking about defunding the police and Medicare for all that are causing the problem. And in fact, what we found is that, say, for example, the Democratic Socialists of America, 29 out of their 40 candidates won. We see progressives win. It is tough in a high turnout presidential year to win congressional districts that the opposing party's presidential candidate had won. And that was the situation for many of these Democrats who are losing seats. Colin Peterson in Minnesota, Trump won that district by double digits. I can't remember the exact number, in 16, and he lost his congressional race this year. And so what we find is that basically the Democratic leadership class, in cahoots with media pundits, want to spin the results in a certain way that is detrimental to the progressive movement. And that's right out of the gate. The truth is the facts don't support it. The analysis, the irony that I saw this morning was members of Hillary Clinton's campaign saying, hey, these results validate us. Our campaign wasn't so bad. It's just the strength of Trump. I'm sorry. That's not true either. Hillary was uniquely unpopular. And so we go from Wisconsin, a 22,000 vote deficit in 16 in favor of Trump, to a 20,000 vote difference in favor of Biden this year. That has everything to do with actually progressives doing incredible turnout in Milwaukee. For example, if we didn't have the motivation of the racial justice uprising, would we have had the African-American turnout that we had? Would we have had the momentum and the organizing and the resources devoted to that? No, we would not have. So in some ways, the conventional analysis is the opposite. Is the progressives in Milwaukee, in Philadelphia, in Detroit did what the Clinton campaign couldn't do, and that is turn out large numbers of Black voters. And we're seeing it literally play out in real time in Philadelphia as those votes come in for Biden and Harris. And I don't think that, I put it positively, I think Harris is a factor. So there's been some discussion about Black and Latino voters, particularly men, going for Trump. And apparently some of the exit polls show about 18% of African-American voters, men, going for Trump. And in some cases, 40% of Latinx voters going for Trump. But the truth is this: 2/3 of the electorate is white. 3/5, maybe it'll go down, but right now it looks like 3/5 of white people voted for Trump. That is the electoral reality that we face, that there are white people, particularly in the Republican Party. We saw a Pew Research poll earlier this year, 14,000 participants, that said only 1 in 10 Republicans believe that Blacks have it worse in the US than whites. 1 in 10. 9 out of 10 Republicans are white. This is a white party. This is a white dynamic in the electorate. And it's certainly possible that there is some backlash among white voters toward the racial justice uprising. That's certainly possible. And so when we look at the racial dynamic, we come back to, I think, my first point, which is there an alternative program that's going to improve the economic well-being, provide real security, and in particular health security to these voters, so that the politics of resentment, which we've been talking about for a while, which has come to dominate Republican Party politics, can be overcome. Now, we're not going to get a majority of those voters. There are social conservative voters, as you all well know. There are other voters that are, fundamental racists and white supremacists. We're not going to necessarily move. But there is a chunk. There's a chunk of that white working class that will be responsive to this program. And if that happens, then you will see places like Texas move. Texas was said to be in play. I think those of us who spent time in Texas found that a stretch. But again, the Dems thought they were lined up to win a bunch of Texas House seats, and they won none. They were lined up to take some congressional seats. Doesn't look like they have. And so think about this. Think about this if you're the Democratic, leadership and designing this electoral program. You're going to raise $40-50 million for these veterans, moderates, running against Cronin in Texas and McConnell in Kentucky. And you're going to, I don't know, I think it's like around 100 million at least, plus maybe even more from the independent expenditures that got spent in those races. But the truth is, McGrath was never going to beat McConnell, and Hagar was going to have a tough time against Cronin. And so we're spending all that money, and at the same time, we didn't pick up a single state legislature for the Democrats. Not a single state legislature turned, therefore the gerrymandering will continue. That encapsulates something that was very characteristic of the Obama period, which is Obama did very well politically and electorally, but the Democrats lost 1,000 legislative seats between 2010 and 2016. That we can't afford again. And what we have, I think, before us, though, is a kind of revelation of the contradictions in the electorate and, frankly, in the limitations of a centrist Democratic program. I still want somebody to tell me what a moderate Democrat is. Is a moderate Democrat pro-corporate? Is a moderate Democrat someone who doesn't think we should address state-sanctioned violence and police brutality? Is a moderate someone who thinks that, we can't really have healthcare for all? And I don't think there's a good definition of moderate except someone who's not a progressive, and that's what the mainstream media does. But the truth is, the progressive movement is where the energy is, where the base is. And I believe, certainly if we pull it out in Nevada, as well as other cities I mentioned, that the progressive movement is responsible for the turnout, and that the final thing I think is reflective of the deficiencies of the Biden campaign. I will give them credit for going to the states that they needed to go to in the last minute, and it looks like they pulled it out. And let's not forget, Joe Biden is getting 4 million more votes than Donald Trump in the popular vote. I mean, does anything expose the contradictions of the American electoral system, where we're like angst-ridden, following every 1,000 votes that emerge, when frankly Biden won the election in any other democracy in the world? He got more votes than the other person, and that to me is kind of indicative of the fundamental failures of our democratic system and the reliance on the Electoral College and, of course, the Senate to empower the minority to prevent the will of the majority. Because the truth is, the progressive agenda is popular. And it's so popular that the irony is that you got all these Democrats trashing Medicare for all, when Fox has a poll that says 72% of voters favored a government-run healthcare system. They didn't even call it Medicare for all. They called it government-run healthcare, and 72% in the Fox exit poll supported it. And somehow it's the problem. The truth is that the Affordable Care Act and the skepticism toward it is because it doesn't solve the problem. It doesn't go far enough. It doesn't control costs. It doesn't guarantee healthcare, and it doesn't provide peace of mind. But the key constituency that, of course, the Biden campaign didn't put together a strong effort with was the Latinx community. And it's not just a problem in Dade County where Clinton intensely outperformed him, but also Chuck Rocha from the Bernie campaign pointed out that none at the presidential level or none of the battleground Senate races had a senior consultant or campaign manager who was Latinx. And that reflects, I think, a fundamental deficiency. And really, Nevada probably shouldn't even be that close if they had run the kind of campaign that Senator Sanders had run in Nevada. So we face a situation there where in the Rio Grande Valley, in other key swing states, we're going to have to take seriously, again, a program that speaks directly to issues in the Latinx community, and healthcare is at the top of that agenda. Finally, we should just remark on Georgia. I mean, that is really incredible, and I do think that the efforts of Stacey Abrams and the others on the African American turnout obviously deserve a lot of credit. And if in fact there was a I think Spanberger, there was a comment in the chat about Spanberger. I think what she said was we shouldn't be talking about Medicare for all. We shouldn't be talking about socialism. We shouldn't be talking about the Green New Deal. But we can take a closer look at that. So in Texas, the Latinx voters are said to have given Trump the win. In Michigan, we did see white voters shift to Biden. Obviously, Biden in the Atlanta area is the base for his success in Florida. Cuban Americans went heavily for Trump. And in North Carolina, the Democratic counties actually moved right. And so it is a very dynamic in these swing states. Let me talk a little bit about healthcare at the national level, because I do think that ironically enough, SPAN is in a stronger position on the healthcare question because the fight moves to the states. If you've got a gridlocked Senate, even if the Democrats win both seats in Georgia, they're going to have 50 votes, and a Senate with 50 votes, I think, is 50 Democratic votes is dependent on people like Joe Manchin from West Virginia, from Christine Sinema from Arizona. That's not really a majority, but that would be the best case. The likelihood is that, in fact, this is an opportunity to go to the Biden administration and say, okay, we can't move even the public option through the Senate at this point. So let's give the states the real opportunity to do universal health care. Let's implement the Section 1332 of the Affordable Care Act that provides federal waivers and monies to states so they can implement a universal healthcare system, with single payer being the obvious demand and approach. Of course, we will be coming off, it looks like, an administration that has literally done everything administratively. The only thing that the Congress passed was they approved judges and nominees, much to the detriment of the country, but they weren't passing lots of legislation. They're passing very little legislation. And so the Trump administration has set a new template for just massive regulatory action, and the power of the administrative apparatus. They're already talking about undoing the worst aspects of the Affordable Care Act changes that Trump made, so that the short-term health plans would not be privileged. There wouldn't be the restrictions on contraceptions and choice. There would be a restoration of equality policy on LGBTQ healthcare. There would be increased subsidies for the Affordable Care Act. All these things they can do administratively, and ironically, the Trump administration provided the template for that kind of aggressive regulatory action. But of course, you can't cover everybody. You can't lower the Medicare eligibility age, and so it is at some fundamental level limited, and that opens up the door for the states. And so something We've got someone, Ohio, kind of the prominent Democrat, I guess the last man standing in a sense statewide is Sherrod Brown. Obviously a real champion of Joe Biden. Clearly his support would be very helpful in moving the state to getting the Biden administration to help Ohio do that. Now, we've got, of course, a severe problem in terms of the Republicans in the state, but I think that's really important, the point that in the context of the Supreme Court case and the potential for much of the ACA to be ruled unconstitutional, I tend to think that's not going to happen. I tend to think they're going to go to severability and just segregate the individual mandate and keep the rest of it. I tend to think that's going to happen. We'll see in the arguments on Tuesday. But assuming that it goes bad, that is going to put maximum pressure on the Republicans to do something. And one of the easiest things for the Republicans to do, perhaps among others, is to enable states to experiment. And frankly, the Trump administration was letting the states do whatever they want. So there's not an argument against single payer at the state level through this waiver system. So I do think that there is that opportunity. And certainly for a state like California, where I live, where a single payer enjoys even broader political support, we're really going to press that fight because that is where really we think the opportunity lies. I would say that we are in a very, this is not unique. This is not a real insight, but we're in a very unique situation. We have still to defeat Donald Trump. We're on the verge, but we still have to defeat Donald Trump. He really is talking about going to the Supreme Court and getting the election overturned. He really is talking about voter intimidation. He's encouraging it. It's kind of unprecedented, and yet still the Republicans are silent. And the moral failings of the Republican Party in this period should always be highlighted. But at the same time, if we're able to actually defeat, I mean, he's really trying to create an authoritarian, autocratic breakthrough by essentially, undermining and eviscerating the electoral process. And then he gets his authoritarian breakthrough by having established it. That's what he's trying to do. Doesn't look like he's going to succeed, but we have to play that out, and it may require even more weeks of work. But that's job number one. Number two, we have to debunk the narrative that progressives are somehow responsible for a tight election victory when that comes. It's not. It's not supported by the facts. It's not supported by where the political momentum is, and it's certainly not going to serve the Democratic Party to be going after a huge chunk of its base at a time when, unless it can make gains in 22, we're not really going to have much of a positive program. And finally, COVID-19 and the pandemic. Many of us in the healthcare organizing world thought that the pandemic would really create a breakthrough, a platform for recognizing that we need a healthcare system that guarantees healthcare to everybody, that introduces a sense of solidarity, that takes advantage of perhaps the kind of caregiving approach that the pandemic would generate. And instead, the pandemic has become a partisan divide, deliberately so. And that, I think, is the opportunity that the Biden administration has. If he could come up with a program that was effective, comprehensive, national, that did tap into the caregiving impulses and desires that exist in the country, that could change. That could change things. And I do think that is something that progressives should welcome and strongly support. Finally, we have to be prepared to organize against a Biden-McConnell bipartisan alliance. Republicans in the cabinets, compromises on policy, kowtowing to judicial appointments. Biden is if he's one thing distinguished himself throughout his political career, is the always play to the right, always compromise with the Republicans, and always promote bipartisanship over the substance of program. And I know there's a lot of talk about him being a transformational president and taking advantage of this moment, but now the political context feeds into his worst impulses and personal history and approach. And the only real, I think, alternative is popular uprising. The racial justice uprising isn't going to go away. The demands for guaranteed health care can't go away. The demands for higher minimum wage, tax the rich, and most importantly, a Green New Deal and climate justice can't go away. Because we were not going to, the planet probably would just be in such severe shape had Trump been reelected. But the question is, the political system doesn't have the will to do what's necessary to save the planet and reverse the climate crisis. And so it's going to take mass action. It's going to take direct action. It's going to take an attack on the fossil fuel industry, just like it's going to take an attack on the healthcare industry, so that the Democrats can no longer front for them. But this challenge of climate, given the tendencies of Biden and his already, fracking is okay, and no, well, we're not really going to get rid of fossil fuels. We're going to get rid of subsidies. All this backtracking, all this mamby-pamby stuff is not going to do what's necessary for the planet. So I take this opportunity to be hopeful that defeating a neo-fascist and winning a popular vote over an explicit white supremacist program, winning key states, turning key states that went the other way, winning some issues on the ballot, the kind of organizing that was done in these communities shows us that we have a true opportunity to create the solidarity and justice that has to be, that has to transform our country. So thanks a lot for having me. Happy to have a discussion and dialogue.
Thank you so much, Michael. I want to remind people again that in order to ask a question, if you want to raise your hand, I'm going to allow you to unmute yourselves. And so when we call on you, if you would unmute yourself, ask your question, and then we'll move to the next person. First person on the list is Vivian Sandland.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Michael. We Democrats got wiped out in Ohio. And I mean, I'm from Portage County, and my God, our rather moderate state representative got defeated. And, anyway, how are we going to, on a state level, have universal health care if we're so completely dominated by Republicans? That's my question.
Okay. And I'm going to ask you, once you've asked your question, please mute yourself so that we don't get background noise. Okay, Michael.
Well, I really appreciate that, Vivian, and it does seem like a big hill to climb. What I would say is that there is, among Republicans, support for guaranteed health care. There is a problem among Republicans that many of their working class folks have lost jobs. That you cannot underestimate the insecurity and failure of the employment-based health insurance system, right, during the pandemic. And of course, a lot of people have died and gotten sick and not really had adequate health care. And even though the COVID is disproportionately impacted in communities of color, both in terms of case rates and death rates, it hasn't spared, white folks either, and it certainly hasn't spared Republicans. I mean, Mark Meadows is, got been diagnosed, the chief of staff. So I do think that the pandemic is the opening there. I do think that employers are fed up. Costs keep going up. And so the question to, DeWine and the others is, what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? And on that point, we have obviously the advantage. I think that if you have a national environment where things aren't happening in terms of healthcare, things aren't getting better, the ACA's further eroded, I think it puts maximum pressure on governments like a Republican-controlled government in Ohio to do something, and that's our opening. Someone made a comment about Sherrod Brown and the centrists, running for Senate. Exactly my point. I think anyone was going to beat Cory Gardner, make a huge difference if Romanoff were the winner in that race. Charles Booker had a much better shot at taking on McConnell than Amy McGrath did. I don't know about Royce West in Texas, but I'm certain there were other progressives who might have come to the fore there. So it's exactly wrong to think that we somehow have to accommodate the Republican control or accommodate a moderate approach. We have to press our issue and force them to act on our issue. That's what the minimum wage, $15 minimum wage in Florida tells us. That's what the legalization of cannabis in New Jersey and Arizona tell us. Issue forward. The Democratic brand is pretty tainted in some of these districts, right? And we're going to have to overcome that, I think, by a focus on how are you going to actually meet the needs of working people.
Yeah. Michael, that brings to mind that in some cases we have Democrats that support Medicare for all until it becomes an actual possibility to pass it, and then they drop out. And Chuck Pinocchio from Pennsylvania has long said that if we turn to the Republicans and start getting them on board, the Democrats will take notice of us. And so many of us operate as a nonpartisan organization, and that just for those reasons. Have we made a huge mistake by not including Republicans with our discussion and lobbying as we have Democrats?
I agree with that. And so let me just say one more thing I forgot to mention. Essential workers who have been so burdened and at risk as a result of the pandemic, have them go to meet with Republican representatives and say, hey, I don't have health care. I've had to risk my life in order to get food on your table. What are you going to do for me? And I think, and no, we're not giving up on Republicans. We go right to them. Take Republican essential workers who have been harmed and so deeply affected by the pandemic. That's what I think is going to change things.
Okay, next question, George Bumfalk.
Close enough. Yeah, thank you.
What is it? What is it really?
It's a long O, Bumfalk, but yeah, that's fine.
Bumfalk.
Yeah. Thank you, Michael. I just read Ibram Kendi's book about how to be an anti-racist, and he seems to suggest, if I interpret it right, that fundamentally everything to do with inequities, particularly healthcare, has racism at its core. And trying to solve these problems with education and persuasion and appeal to morality and rights has been kind of a losing strategy historically. And that the really only path to solving something like Medicare for all might be a change in policy. So once the policy's there and people begin to see the benefits, then they'll slowly kind of come around, kind of as happened with hospital integrations with Medicare. So what do you see is besides what you discussed already, the path to Medicare for all? Mass education and persuasion, like we're trying to do with our group, PNHP and NNU and others? Or as Kendi suggests, by changing policy first, kind of ramming it through and then expecting people to see the benefits and come to support it. And so, are we wasting our time trying to educate the general public who seem to resist this out of unfounded fears?
Yeah, George, I think that's a very good point that Kendi makes, and in that the ACA proves it. The ACA was unpopular, and then it was implemented. People got coverage, they got subsidies, the uninsured got health care, lives were saved, and it changed people's perceptions. And what we're facing now is the kind of the undermining of the Affordable Care Act with the Trump administration, and just the cost increases and the fact that it really doesn't solve the problem has created a new opening about, the ACA isn't going to do it. And you're right. That's why I really favor state single payer, because we take the political support that we have in California, implement it in California, and show the country that it can work. I do think that's right. I tend to think that that there's not any alternative to Medicare for all that's actually going to guarantee universal health care. I mean, there just isn't a policy on the table that can do what Medicare for all can do. So given that, of course, you want to figure out any way you possibly could to implement that policy. And I don't think we can do it administratively at the federal level. That to me seems like a major stretch. We could do it through budget reconciliation with 51 votes in the Senate. If the House were to pass it as well, that's also difficult. So what we are left with is, I think, this regulatory path through the states in the short term. And you're right. I tend to think on the mass education and so forth, our problem with Medicare for all is fundamentally a problem of political will. If you've got a policy that's supported by 70% of the people, probably more, 80% of Democrats, and your party isn't pursuing that policy, right? That demonstrates a lack of political will. If you were to simply consolidate the supporters of Medicare for all into a force, it would be overwhelming, right? And that's really our task, is to win the political fight. And now I believe that means taking on the healthcare industry, demanding divestment, exposing their profits during the pandemic, exposing the executive salaries, exposing their business model of denial and death and destruction, literally, right? They're literally killing people. So in that sense, I think we've got to educate folks about the industry and stop enabling Democrats to front for an industry that is literally killing people. They cannot keep getting away with, we need more subsidies to United Health after they made $6 billion in the second quarter. Kaiser, it's a model. Integrated healthcare system made $4.5 billion in 3 months during the pandemic. It's unacceptable, it's unconscionable, and that's what we have to expose. And if it's a fight between the insurance industry, the health insurance industry, and Medicare, we win that fight.
I also want to tell you, if you're on your phone, you can raise your hand by pressing *9, and then you unmute by *6. We have a question from the chat, actually. Is the public option a possibility? Can Biden push that through?
Well, it's funny because I love the pundits. We're going to have, the Democrats are going to take the Senate, but there are going to be all these moderates who, and so it's going to be very difficult for Biden to do anything. Well, the truth was the moderates, Hickenlooper, McGrath, Hagar, were all running on the public option. So it was like, why can't you do the public option if these new senators support it? But without 50 votes plus the VP, I don't think we can get the public option through the Senate. Definitely have support in the House, even with a diminished Democratic majority. The public option that Biden had come up with was not bad. It was not a new plan. It was an expansion of Medicare. It was eligible at no cost for everyone who is in a non-Medicaid expansion state. And so it lowered the age to 60 for Medicare, maybe 55 or lower. So it really did seem like it was something that would really improve people's health and save lives. It was inadequate to solve the overall system problem, but you can at least say it was better. I think that that kind of public option doesn't make sense at the state level, because the whole purpose of it is you've expanded Medicare, you put people in Medicare. So that again leaves us with, what do you do at the state level? Some people will obviously push for expansion of Medicaid, which is Medicaid's better than nothing, I think is the phrase. So I think the opportunities for the public option are limited by the failure of the Dems to take control of the Senate. I suppose there is a possibility in 22 that they run on healthcare and get a majority that would enable them to do it. But I think in the meantime, that's not going to happen. You're going to see regulatory fixes to the ACA, hopefully an opening for state single payer, and a continuing work at the state level on Medicaid expansion.
Thank you. I also want to give a shout out to PNHP, Physicians for a National Health Program, who publicized this program today, and we've had a great response from them, and we're very happy to have some of the PNHP members join us today. Next up is Ken Rosenberg.
Hi, Michael. First, a statement. I think anybody who has the capacity should be phone banking in Georgia for the next 2 months for voter registration. My question is, what do you think the Progressive Caucus will do to advance Medicare for All in 2021? What kind of strategy do you think is likely that they will develop as the Biden administration goes on in the first 2 years?
That's an interesting question, Ken, because I think if the Dems had gotten a majority in the Senate, and I agree with you, it's worth fighting in Georgia, no question about it. I think that would be very significant, and it's not impossible. But I do think that the Progressive Caucus is in a tough spot. There was, when it looked like the Democrats were going to do better, there was talk of maybe even supporting this Medicare expansion public option. That Congresswoman Jayapal was saying very favorable things about it. She had been involved in the task force that had come up with that proposal. And so it looked like that might be a path. My view is that the Progressive Caucus needs to develop a core that will not compromise, will not be voting for kind of Biden-McConnell austerity program, won't be voting for things like just a fix for COBRA, right? Enabling folks to buy into COBRA, or just fix the ACA. I think we need a real core in the Progressive Caucus that's going to say, unless you give a markup and a vote on Medicare for All, you're not going to get our vote on other incremental reforms. That's what I think it's going to take. Do we have the political will for that kind of thing? That kind of approach among the Progressive Caucus? It's not clear. I think that the Progressive Caucus should focus on exposing the insurance industry and move the hearings and the other congressional work and their outreach work and their organizing work to going after the healthcare industry, to delegitimizing how our premiums pay for every profit, every care denial, every death that the insurance companies are responsible for. We've given them the money to do that. And we have to not be afraid to expose the reach and power of the insurance industry in Congress. It is not a coincidence that every time James Clyburn says something about the election, he says, I don't want Medicare for all. He's a Congress member from South Carolina. He's gotten $1 million from pharma. That we have to break up the industry hold on Democratic members of Congress. So if the Progressive Caucus can participate in those demands for divestment, in exposure of the healthcare industry practices and the insurance companies, demanding prescription drug price reform, right? Putting maximum heat on industry profits, that to me would be a potentially successful approach. Finally, we had hearings at the key committees of jurisdiction, but we know what the Democratic leadership ultimately did was very modest fixes. On COBRA, they wouldn't do the Healthcare Emergency Guarantee Act. And I do think we should push the Healthcare Emergency Guarantee Act, because we know that Biden is going to have some program for COVID, some program to address healthcare in the pandemic. Let's get the Healthcare Emergency Guarantee Act in the mix, cover everybody's copays, cover the uninsured, cover the people who haven't been able to get coverage through the Medicaid expansion. I think the Progressive Caucus should put that at the forefront of their agenda, because it enacts the principles of Medicare for All. It directly addresses the immediate needs of people in the pandemic and sets the table for what we ultimately want.
Thank you, Michael.
Next up, James Binder.
Thanks, Michael. I love what you're saying, and it was very interesting what you said about moderates. What's a moderate Democrat? Really hit the nail on the head. Question I have is, what are the strategies for changing the narrative of the pundits about this? How do you go about doing that?
Exactly. I actually tend to think that we need probably fewer politicians as leaders and more activists and organizers as leaders. I tend to think that we defer to some of the congressional dynamics, or believe that the elected officials are somehow going to deliver results. And so I do tend to think that popular organizing, we haven't talked about labor, but I actually think labor is the crucial constituency, because you've seen the essential workers on the front lines engaging in mass action. We've seen teachers in Red for Ed. We've seen healthcare workers go on strike, even during a pandemic, because their lives are at risk. There is a huge amount of, in meatpacking plants, in warehouses, there's a huge amount of organizing going on. The Fight for 15 success in Florida reflects that, I think. So let's get back to basics and focus on workers. Goes back to my original point, improving the economic well-being of workers. That has to be in the forefront. It has to be a movement strategy. And I do think that if, the media has taken very seriously the essential workers and their issues. If we build on that, that's an opening into a media narrative. We cannot discount the impact of Fox. There is no Trump administration without Fox. There's not a close election in 2020 without Fox. And so it's not just the media in general, but it's also the specific impact of Fox. I believe we need an alternative, left network. Haven't been able to, organize one. So I think we've got to put ordinary people forward. And if it looks like just another fight between the political class, Republicans versus Democrats, this politician versus that politician, I think it's tougher to win the media narrative. I think if it's ordinary people speaking out, organizing, look, we did change. I say, it's not really we, it's the Black Lives Matter movement. It's the racial justice uprising. It's the young people who put their bodies on the line in the streets and got beat up for it. 1,000 instances of police brutality, at least. We have majority support for addressing racial injustice in this country. Obviously, there was some backlash, but that's what happens when popular uprisings take hold and tap into something. That's what we need to do. That's how you change the media narrative, is through that kind of organizing. I think it has to be based on workers. I think it has to be based in mass action, popular demand. And I think we have to build on and form a clear alliance with the racial justice uprising. We're not going to win Medicare for all on its own. It's got to be part of a broad justice movement. We're the health justice wing of that justice movement. If we're actually going to address the underlying social and health inequities that created the death rates in the Black and Latino and Indigenous and Asian Pacific Islander communities, we're going to have to link with that movement, put those issues in the forefront, and it helps us politically overcome some of the opposition that exists in the Congressional Black Caucus, for example. So that, I think, is really our task on a movement basis. Bring the essential workers to the fore, build a real alliance with the racial justice movement, and change the narrative through mass action.
All right, D. Chavez, why don't you go ahead and we'll see if we can work with Don to get him unmuted. So D, go ahead.
Okay. My question is, you mentioned, Michael, that if we could talk to Sherrod Brown here in Ohio and, get him on board to help us, and he could talk to Biden to help our state, what does that look like? How would he ask Biden to help us, like financial help or what?
Approved. Well, it would be to basically approve a waiver. Section 1332 of the Affordable Care Act provides for a shifting of federal resources into a universal health care program for Ohio. And I think if Sherrod Brown were to make that ask of the Biden administration, and the Biden administration say we're open to a proposal from the Biden administration, and if the Biden administration wants to do it, that puts some pressure on DeWine. And I do think that's what we need to do, is create a climate where, we want to guarantee health care to people. We should acknowledge that apparently they finally called Pennsylvania for Joe Biden. It looks like he is going to be president. And that is That's an amazing thing.
Okay.
We shouldn't take that lightly. But yeah, that's what I think. Dee, is I think we can. He's a political supporter of the president-elect.
Yes.
We can say that now, and so he should use his influence to get health care for Ohioans.
Okay.
Okay, Don is now unmuted, so let's let Don. Can you ask a question?
Yes. SPAN has been working, trying to get its bill on the ballot. That entails raising millions of dollars. We can't pull that off. I think that what we need to do is go from the top down, that we have a bill that's before the legislature. We try to, when the time is right, we contact the governor and try to get him to tell the legislature, if you enact this bill, I'll sign it. That means that SPAN has to be talking with especially the Republicans in the legislature. That's getting easier. Dee and I have been traveling around in our district talking to Republican representatives, but we can now do that with Zoom. And so that's my plan. But we're going to have to wait for a year or two because both the health department and the government are overwhelmed with the virus. But I think our time will come. Thank you.
Any comments, Michael?
Just quickly, the election didn't change what people are worried about. They're worried about getting coronavirus. They are. Deaths are rising in 27 states. It's surging. And so, again, the Trump administration hasn't had a plan. The Biden administration is going to have a plan. The Healthcare Emergency Guarantee Act demands, like in Ohio, there's a huge amount of public money going into hospitals at a time when the insurance companies are making record profits. People are deferring care. I think all these issues can be discussed and organized around with Republicans. And because really DeWine has wanted to try to, figure out a way, seems anyway, to kind of, stop the pandemic, and he hasn't been able to. So I think there is still an opening there, and I'm really glad you're reaching out. The other alternative approach that states are using, California is using it, Oregon, Washington, are commissions. Commissions set up to establish universal health care. Because the Republicans have a problem. They don't actually have a program that fits with their ideology that guarantees health care. So to expose that and to organize around that is an opening.
Thank you. In other news, besides the fact that they're declaring Biden the winner, Donald Trump is taking advantage of the good weather, and he's gone golfing now. So, so Ken Joslin, you're up.
This is a two-part question about getting things done through the states. One is, you said regulatory programs through the states. I'd like you to say more. I'm assuming it would have to be legislative and obviously getting waivers. The second part is, are there any states that you see that are poised to succeed that we ought to be watching and learning from?
I do think California and New York, I wouldn't say they're on the brink, but they are definitely positioned. And you've got, it's true, that's why I say those states, because you're right, Ken, the legislature has to do this at the state level, ultimately, right? You can't just implement universal health care at the state level through the executive branch, through the governor. Can't do it. And you can do certain things, obviously. I think some governors have expanded Medicaid, right? So it's not impossible that you couldn't do some things. But the regulatory changes that we can do at the state level tend to be more in that realm. Raising reimbursement rates for Medicaid, expanding eligibility. Obviously that takes money. A lot of what's happened just de facto is that Medicaid has picked up the burden for the loss of employment-based insurance. That's creating a budget crisis. The one thing the Biden administration is going to have to get is money for the states, as well as cities, right? And so that I think is a huge congressional fight. And the Republican, I mean, I don't think these Republican counties or Republican states are doing any better than the blue states when it comes to fiscal health and the ability to cover people who've lost their insurance. So I think that's an opening as well. But what we need to do in California is we got to move the governor to ask for a waiver from the Biden administration. Huge. I think there's a huge incentive for the Biden administration to grant those waivers. And then you come back, the governor has basically, if he does that, he changes it from whether to how. Okay, now we're going to do single payer. How are we going to do it, legislature? And that's the dynamic we want to get to. And that's the dynamic that these commissions in Oregon, Washington, and California are trying to create. So that, we'll see. I think because of the pandemic and the race-based inequities, there is a different opening. We have to always go back, I think, to the pandemic, the racial justice uprising. There's a different opening. And we're going to have a new senator from California. So hopefully they can bring support for single payer to Washington.
Okay, public service announcement, check the chat. Dr. Bill has invited us to join the Progressive Democrats Healthcare Emergency Town Hall tomorrow at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, 1 p.m. Pacific, which will include Michael, Donna Smith, Dr. Paul Song, and others. There's a link to sign up for that in the chat, so take a look at that. Okay, next question comes from a phone, and I'm assuming that this is Bob Crazen. It's area code 216-255-2184. And go ahead, please. Unmute *6 and ask.
Hello?
Hello. No, it's not Bob. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, it's Greg Coleridge. A quick comment and a question. Comment about, Michael, thank you so much for being here and your very insightful comments. You made a comment about the need to build a movement, ultimately to push things at the grassroots in ways that leadership will not. And I'm just wondering, if you believe that ultimately we won't be able to achieve anything unless we achieve everything. And so your comment on that. And then my question is, do you think that given that the conservatives on the Supreme Court are as much political, maybe more so political than they've ever been, that they will give a second thought to making a change to the ACA, knowing that there are these two competitive Senate races in Georgia that without there being an ACA, that those senators are exposed for having to then make an argument for what their plans are for health care when they don't have any. Pass.
Well, I agree on both points. Everything is everything. And I think it's very hard to imagine winning Medicare for all absent, say, a $15 minimum wage and a real effort to reverse the climate crisis. I mean, I think that those things, this is all part of the justice demands, and we have to make them and understand that they're ultimately going to be simultaneous. So I do tend to agree with that. I think the Supreme Court needs to be understood as a partisan branch of government. It's a Republican-controlled branch of government. I think it just needs to be understood as that. I mean, this bullshit, that Barrett was putting forward on originalism is completely irrelevant. There's no such thing as originalism. It isn't intended by the drafters and authors of the Constitution to be static. That every advance, the whole evolution of Supreme Court decisions has been that they've applied those constitutional approaches to their contemporary situation, sometimes in very bad ways. Dred Scott, Plessy versus Ferguson, and so forth. So it's always been political. This is part of the problem that Biden is not a good match for this moment, because what this moment with the Supreme Court requires is if you can't if you can't expand the court through legislation or limit the terms, the reason that we allowed the Supreme Court to adjudicate the constitutionality of legislation is because of the decision, I'm trying to remember the year, 1804, around that time. John Marshall essentially instituted that procedure at the beginning of the Republic. But that is
Marbury
not
versus Madison.
Marbury versus Madison. Thank you very much. Yes, exactly. Marbury versus Madison established the approach that the Supreme Court has the right to rule on constitutionality of legislation. That's not in the Constitution. If the Biden administration really wanted to take on the Supreme Court, it would say, fine, you think that the limitations on coal emissions are not a part of the Clean Air Act? We disagree. We're going to keep enforcing those limits on emissions. We're not going to abide by your decision on contraception. We're the executive branch. We've elevated the Supreme Court to a more powerful branch that is not co-equal with the others. That it determines what other branches of government can do. That is where I think the ideological fight should be, is to challenge that.
Bill Davis, one of our co-hosts, can't raise his hand, and he's been trying to ask a question. So we'll let you go ahead, Bill.
Thanks, Deb. Michael, since the beginning of 2020, I witnessed the ACLU, Common Cause, and the Sierra Club run massive efforts to protect or influence voters. Are single-payer grassroots organizations going to have to take steps to support and grow into professionally run movement?
Yeah, it's a tough question, Bill, because the truth is we've never had a resourced, deeply, institutionalized, organized movement for Medicare for all. Think what they had for the Affordable Care Act. They had these foundations throwing money at them, $40, $50 million, right? And as you say, the ACLU raised tens of millions of dollars in the context of the Black Lives Matter racial justice uprising. And we've just never had anybody, not a deep pocket, not the labor movement, not the liberal establishment, who has ever devoted a fraction. We have two foundations, a number of foundations, but a couple of foundations in particular were started to provide universal health care in California when the for-profit insurers were converted from the nonprofit to for-profit. They've done two policy papers since the 90s on single payer. Two. And that was just like in 2017. So we do not have the institutional support that one would see as necessary to win. So I agree with you, is that it's not necessarily so much do we need to, create, organizations or institutions. We need the resources. We need the philanthropic resources. One of the reasons we like the California approach is that if the Biden administration were to approve a waiver after request, that would also put the foundations and the philanthropic community devoted to healthcare on the hot seat. It's like, hey, the governor wants to do it. The federal government says we should do it, and here's how we can do it. So are you going to step up and educate Californians and help us do it? So you're right. In addition to the alliance building and the other kind of strategic positioning, we need lots of money. We need lots of resources. We need lots of staff. And that's when I say the political will. Because of all those supporters of single payer and all those supporters of the ACA who say, yeah, we just want to get to single payer, were to actually put their money where their rhetoric at times is, then we would be in an, I think, organizational position to win. So I think you're right.
Let me ask a quick follow-up then. How do we go about approaching a couple of these organizations that, like the ACLU or Common Cause or Planned Parenthood to ally with them on single payer?
We moved the labor movement. And we moved the labor movement into a leadership position.
Okay.
And the labor movement is in alliance with all these groups. And the labor movement is funding a lot of their campaigns. And it's a mutual, resourced relationship. what we need, that is our best shot at getting a major political institutional element of our movement to lead and move the rest of it. And I think that's what it's going to take. I do think that the failure of the employment-based insurance system during the pandemic should not be discounted. And so I think that's where the opening is. There's a huge amount of backlash, in the AFL-CIO in favor of these, still the trust funds and so forth. But the fact is, let's remember, two things happened in Nevada during the primary. One is that the labor movement went all out against us, and on the other hand, the rank and file supported us, right? Ended up voting for Bernie over the objections of the union, who thought it was going to destroy their health plan. So that tells us something, I think, about how we need to move forward.
Thank you so much for being here today.
Yep.
I really appreciate your information.
We have another public service announcement. January 23rd through 24th will be an a virtual National Strategy Conference with Healthcare Now and I believe the Labor Campaign. So save the date and information will be coming. Linda Brown is up. Linda, unmute.
Hello. My question is related to the Healthcare Emergency Guarantee Act. If that's enacted, is it going to strengthen the possibility that we'd have a national system or state level systems? Is it going to move us more towards Medicare or Medicaid? Does that make sense?
It does, totally, Linda. And it moves us much more to, it's a Medicare model. Medicare covers everybody's out-of-pocket expenses. Everybody's. Medicare covers those who are uninsured because their state didn't expand Medicaid. Medicare covers others on the individual market, right, who can't afford policies. So it really is, it's a great stepping stone. The Healthcare Emergency Guarantee Act really should be this Congressional Progressive Caucus's agenda item, because it really does address on a national basis the insecurity and the lack of coverage that people have.
So what's the best strategy for bringing that to the forefront and making that successful, to implement it, to have it implemented?
Well, my view is that if the Congressional Progressive Caucus takes the position that we're not voting for anything unless you give us a vote on this, and then we organize the hell out of it and see if we can win that vote as a superior alternative.
Right.
I think that's really what it's going to take congressionally.
We have time for a couple more questions. Michael's been working hard, and he got up really early this morning to do this for us, and stuff. So Patricia Blachowiak. Patricia, you're up.
Thank you very much. Going back to all those organizations, Planned Parenthood and something, every time they ask me for money, I respond by telling them that I expect them to support Medicare for All and why it's good for their organization. It's an easy thing to do. It takes seconds. But really the reason I wanted this time was to say we have a situation where we have what I consider to be a weak political will among the electorate. In other words, people are willing to say on a questionnaire, yeah, they support Medicare for All, but they aren't interested enough to really work for it. And we also have a situation where seniors don't understand the advantages of Medicare for All over current Medicare. Residents of school districts don't understand how much their districts are spending on health insurance and what could be saved by Medicare for All. Black Lives Matter and comparable groups don't see the connection between healthcare disparities and Medicare for All. Businesses don't understand international competition. Communities, especially urban communities, don't understand the association between bankruptcy and medical debt. And labor doesn't understand, in general, the association between having to bargain for medical coverage, taking away from their ability to bargain for work conditions and pay. I think what we need is targeted information to various groups to increase their understanding of the advantages of Medicare for All. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. Let's unpack some of that stuff, Patricia, because in general, I agree. I think that in particular, business is blinded by their kind of free market ideology and saying, well, yeah, the healthcare is expensive. I can't afford it really. It's too complicated. I don't want to deal with it. But I'm in solidarity with the insurance industry because, God, if government has, expands its role in healthcare, what's it going to do next? And we have to overcome that. And I think tech and other, not in the case of Uber and Lyft and those guys, but in some respects, tech is more progressive, more open to that argument. I think we should go there. I do think, though, that on the labor question, it's not true. It's stratified. That at the national union level, tied into the Democratic Party, the political imperatives on policy are driven by that relationship with the Democrats. But if you talk to people, rank and file, if you talk to people who negotiate contracts, if you talk to local leaders, there's huge support for Medicare for All. Unions representing a majority of workers are on record for Medicare for All, and even those who don't necessarily support it have convention resolutions in favor of it. So you're right, it is a question of political will and moving that leadership, I think, from the bottom up. And there are sectors who get it, and there's within the labor movement, and there are sectors even within business who get it. And so we have to move those folks into a position of real support. You're right. We've got this broad popular support. How do we turn it into a legislative majority? How do we turn, and that goes back to, I think, the corruption of the Democrats and their relationship to the healthcare industry. And let's not forget that as soon as it became clear that the Senate was unlikely, though it's still not settled, to have a majority for like a public option or other healthcare reform, stock prices of the insurance companies have gone up tremendously. I think it was like 14%, 10%, et cetera. So the profits of the industry are directly tied to the policy decisions in Washington, and that nexus is what we have to blow up.
I thought Martha Livingston had a question, but I don't see her hand up anymore. But Martha, if you want to ask your question, unmute and...
Thanks, Debbie. I felt as though Michael had started to answer it. Hi, Michael.
Hey, Martha.
I just wanted to weigh in from New York because New York and California are the two states that are closest, though not bloody close at all, to passing state-based single payer. And we've been on this for some years, and what's happened in our state is that labor support, as we've gotten closer to our goal, has diminished. I think that now that this election is done, maybe we're going to start to have an opening. We're certainly going to start pressing this fight. But folks who are not in labor, it's easy for you all to say, labor just doesn't understand that if we had single payer, why healthcare would be off the table and everything would be so much nicer. That may be true. I certainly believe that. And we have a little merry band of labor activists in New York called Labor Activists for New York Health, which I helped start. We need to figure out the various ways, and we've got some very smart people from labor in our group, various objections that our institutional unions have in the state of New York, because they've really backed off in the last couple of years. Once we won the New York State Senate and it started to look as though we had a snowball's chance of actually passing this, a bunch of, and labor is not monolithic. There are some very right-wing labor unions in my state and in our country, particularly the building trades. And so this is a big deal, and we could have one of these forums. And Michael, I'm hereby extending you an invitation, let's figure it out, to come talk to my merry band about how to strategize specifically in labor, because this wonderful meeting that we've had today is looking at the bigger picture, and I would love us to drill down and see how we can overcome and really win over some of our unions to move this in the state of New York. So that was a whole lot of words, and not with a focused question, but just to say, folks who are not in labor, I think you don't see that there are so many different kinds of objections. And it's not because people are terrible human beings, and it's not because they're corrupt, except sometimes, because they have some institutional ties to the insurance industry, and they don't want to give up those dollars that helps them run their unions, blah, blah, blah. Over to you, Michael, and thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Martha. It's a real treat to see you, and I really appreciate your insights, because that is the reality check. What you just said, that's the reality check. We have to address these labor issues. You're right. Some of them can be addressed through policy, how to accommodate their multi-state membership, how to accommodate the trust funds' ability to maintain a role in providing health benefits. Right? I think there is a way. I think the New York Health Act is written in a brilliant way to enable trust funds to play that role in terms of care coordination, in terms of being a health service administrative entity, and still preserving elements of single payer. I mean, I'm not going to make the case that state single payer, whether it's in California or New York, is going to really achieve the full set of savings and advantages of single payer, right? Because it's much harder to do on a state level. But I think we can achieve the policy goals of guaranteed health care, cost containment. And when we talk about the other element in labor that we have to talk about are the concrete aspects of what's it going to cost you. We've tried to do this on a moral basis, or we've tried to say, yeah, you're going to have better benefits. But let's get down to the nitty gritty. This is what it's going to cost you. This is why it's going to save us money over the present system. These are the benefits you're going to get. And we're going to protect jobs too, right? We're going to have a real transition program for people displaced. Because in New York, you've got huge, Martha better than anyone, the huge healthcare administrative bureaucracy that exists in New York. And so we got to be very concrete and specific to address exactly what the labor folks are raising, right? And then there's the organizing piece of the rank and file. I tend to think we're in good shape there. But I think the advantage that we have in California over New York is that governor, leadership matters, particularly obviously in a Democratic state. Our experience is that when a Republican governor is there to veto single payer, the Democratic legislatures will support it. So it takes a Democratic governor's support to move it. And that's what kind of changed in California, but hasn't been fully, I don't think, tested and implemented is Newsom's support. So one theory of change in New York would be to have a gubernatorial election on where Medicare for all single payer features prominently and the single payer proponent wins. That's what happened in California, and it did create new openings.
Okay, we will take two last questions before we conclude our program for today, from Ken and then from Linda. So Ken, go ahead.
I am reading Robert Reich, System, which is all about money and power. And you touched on trying to help legislators sever themselves from the profound influence of both the health industry and pharma. Can you just say more about how, if we do this at a state level, that figures in or slows us down?
I see. My view of the state work is that it creates political openings for us, that it has political advantages. Even if we can't create the perfect single payer policy, we can wage a political fight that changes the possibilities at the federal level and, of course, concretely in that state. So I do think the political fight's waging. Our theory in California back in the aughts was that we could never win single payer unless we did campaign finance reform and clean money reform in particular. Right, is that we haven't talked about it, but it's actually kind of like a really determining factor. I mean, Nancy Pelosi's raised tens of millions of dollars, tons from the healthcare industry. I mentioned James Clyburn, $1 million from pharma. The Congressional Black Caucus doesn't have generally rich constituencies in many of its districts, and so it tends to fundraise from the special interests in Washington in order to make their dues payments to the Democratic leadership to maintain their leadership position or their committee assignments or so forth. So the system creates the demand, literally, for special interest health insurance and health, drug, pharma, healthcare industry money. So yes, the prospects of doing that seem even more daunting, but it is necessary. And at the state level, we have had victories. Right, I tend to think we should be in a better, stronger position in Maine, for example, to do single payer. Got to elect the right people because they have clean money. So I tend to think that the opening at the state level on the question of campaign finance reform is much better than at the federal level and being able to do some of that stuff. And that does create the precondition for, I think, having new influence over the legislatures if we can eliminate the money.
Hey, Linda Brown.
Thank you. I'd like to ask, how do we ensure that if we're chanting for Medicare for all, that we end up with a true universal health care system and not in some version of the current for-profit 80-20 plans and advantage plans? Because we really don't.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Linda, because my fear about Medicare for all is that all this, it's very broad but not very deep, the popular support. So if someone we saw this during the Democratic primary, all of a sudden Pete Buttigieg, like Medicare for all who want it, was seen as the same thing as Medicare for all. Like you go to the doors and you say, okay, you'll vote for Medicare for all candidates, you'll support Medicare for all. And then someone comes along, the next person who talks to them says, well, this works just as well. This is the same thing. And people are like, oh, okay. There is a real problem with what is called Medicare for all. There's a real problem. I mean, even Vice President-elect Harris's plan was essentially an expansion of the for-profit Medicare Advantage health plans, and she called it Medicare for all. And no one really kind of challenged it, right? So this is a major issue. And that's why we have to have a committed constituency. I say it's labor, I think it's others. I do think Planned Parenthood and the choice movement. I mean, it's amazing what they let the ACA do to women's access to reproductive health services. I mean, if it's the ACA, it's okay, even though those access to contraceptions and abortions being eviscerated. It's actually only a public system that's going to guarantee reproductive justice. So we got to bring them along as well. But that's what I mean. We got to have that core committed constituency that is well educated, that can help us move through unions and other community institutions, clarity on what Medicare for all is.
Hey, Michael, thank you so much. This has been really informative, and we could probably go on for the rest of the afternoon. But I think all of us want to kind of take advantage of some of the Indian summer that we're having, the beautiful winter or weather that is out there. I know I've got to go do some leaves.
We can celebrate too, Deb, right?
Yeah, we can. We can do that and stuff. I do want to invite everybody to visit our webpage. And you can see where it says become a member. You can do an individual membership, or if you have an organization, you can join us as an organization, or you can join us on our mailing list. And there's also our list of upcoming events. So again, if you're in the Cleveland area, you'll want to join their event that's coming up on November 15th. And up here where it says the YouTube here, we will have a recording of this program up there probably by the end of next week. And you can show that to people in your group if you want to promote it there and let people know. So, well, again, Michael, thank you so much. It's always good to see you and to hear from you. It's really been a great program. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank all of you for joining us and for hanging on. It's been, really great. This has been very, very, very good for us. So until the next time, I will tell you in April, we do have Catherine Isaac, who will be talking about the just transition. And we have Mark Gudzik, who is going to be talking about the labor campaign. And we hope to have a Canadian labor leader or two that can explain to us how Medicare for All has actually helped the labor movement. And we will certainly let everyone know about that program when that comes about. Okay, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Deb. Thank you all.
You.